everyone, and welcome to In Contrast. My name is Alan.
And I'm Nisha.
And on this show, we talk about movies and the books that they're based on.
The catch is that you watch the movie and I read the book, with a few exceptions.
That's right. And through our conversation, we try to answer the age-old question, is the book better than the movie?
Today we're talking about Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux, I believe is how
it is. Leroux, right?
Leroux,
okay.
I think that's how it's
You're
pronounced.
the one that knows French more than me.
Yeah, that's one of the few things I didn't double check how to pronounce. So, the book, quick synopsis, a narrator who I don't think they ever name in the book, learns about the tragic history of the Paris Opera House. From the beginning of the book, he reveals that the opera ghost is not a ghost at all.
Right from the get-go, huh?
Spoilers. The prologue is set in 1910, but the rest of the story is actually in 1880. And then I do believe at the very end, they go back to 1910 again to wrap everything up. And we follow Raoul as he attempts to uncover the secrets of the Angel of Music and his sweetheart, Christine Daae. And just a quick disclaimer. I am half Indian. I am going to call him Rahul at some point during this podcast. And I apologize. His name is Raoul, and I will probably say it wrong, and I'm going to try.
Rahul makes more sense. Raoul's got a lot of vowels in
Raoul
there.
Raoul is too many vowels in a row. Rahul is a great... I'm sorry if your name is Raoul, but Rahul is a better name.
Well, usually there's also R-A-U-L, you know? But he's got that extra O in there.
Yeah,
It's just a little much.
He spells it R-A-O-U-L, and as you know, the French do love
their
vowels.
Extra vowels.
Yes.
Superfluous letters.
Yes. Do you have a bio for the movie, or is it basically the same?
So this is what makes it complicated, is that this is, a work that's been around for a long time, right? So like you said, it was written in 1910. This was the first iteration of this. And so now it's been around for 114 years now. It's a long time.
Wow, you did the math.
Wow, imagine that. I needed my calculator. So, in that time frame, there's been a lot of adaptations of this. Whether it's on the stage or in a film or whatever it may be, there's a lot of different versions of this, and they're all quite different from each other in certain ways. So for this, I watched 3 different ones. I wanted to watch even more, to be honest, because they all sort of have their own special, unique thing about them. There's one that I felt like I could skip, but we'll go over all of that. So for this one, I watched the original film adaptation, which was the 1925 silent film. This one was actually made, with conversations from the author. He was somewhat involved in the production of it, at least through conversation, and
Yeah, I do believe he died before it was released, or shortly thereafter.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I don't recall the exact timeline, but he, they had started on this process, I think, in 1918 or something. So it was only, 8 or so years after the book was written. And films were just starting to become more popular. So they had worked on this, and basically they decided to create this movie as kind of a vessel for Lon Chaney, who played the Phantom. He was well known for creating his own kind of, special effects makeup for his characters, and, was quite revered for that and his artistry in that. So it was kind of created solely for the purpose of, they felt like it was a good story to match with his abilities with that.
Oh, wow. So it was really about the special effects makeup.
Right. And that, of course, was kind of the selling point of the whole movie. Not to mention just the fact that people were interested in the story. It wasn't, I'll let you speak more on this, but it wasn't a super well-reviewed book when it first came out. It sort of has had its ebbs and flows over the years in terms of how people think about it. But the story has definitely lived on, and I think that's one of the more interesting pieces of this conversation.
Yeah.
And that's in no small part to, there was this phase in the 40s where they started, in the 30s as well, they started releasing all of these, kind of monster movies and things, the Draculas and Frankensteins.
Yeah.
And, you kind of had the silent film era of that, and then a resurgence of it later on. And so this was another piece of that as well. So there was another one made in 1943, and this one deviated quite a bit from the book and the original film.
Interesting.
We'll speak more on those details, as we go through it. But it hits a lot of the same beats, or it does a lot of the same things, but it's not always the same people doing it, or it's not always the same, explanations for things, stuff like that. I did actually find it a really interesting movie. It was quite different, but I appreciated the changes that were made in a way. And then, of course, there is the one that's probably the most prominently known nowadays, which is the adaptation of the musical itself, made by Andrew Lloyd Webber, and that's the 2004 film adaptation of the musical, starring Gerard Butler.
Which I have seen that, and at the mention of that, I just find myself having this, like, throbbing migraine for some reason. Not sure why. But is that the history you want to share? Because I have some cool history that might tie in as well.
We'll start with that for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me say that you're correct, that the book was not super well received. It was actually a newspaper serial, and Gaston Leroux was already known in French and English-speaking countries, excuse me. Most of this information is from Wikipedia, little disclaimer, but most of it did have sources. So
Wikipedia hits, okay?
Oh.
It does the job.
Wikipedia slaps. So there was some thought originally that it didn't perform as well as I think he had 6 other books beforehand.
He had one particularly popular one.
Yeah, and so there was thought that this one hadn't performed as well, but it turns out that's not true. Based on historical numbers, it actually performed comparably at least. But it was not reviewed super well. In a 1911 review from the New York Times, someone said that the book loses suspense when you realize the ghost is just a man. And don't forget that he says that in the first chapter.
Right.
So
it loses suspense immediately.
Yeah, so this mystery literally loses all suspense in the first chapter. And I kind of describe it as, like, I agree with that, in that the mystery becomes, ooh, how did Christine Daae walk through a mirror, instead of, like, how the heck is this happening? Is this really a ghost? What's going on? But you're like, oh no, it's a man with a skull face and burning eyes. And then you're just kind of like, but it's a man. Like, okay. And
that's still kind of scary, to be fair.
It is scary and interesting, but we'll get into it more. I have strong feelings about this book, and I suppose now is a good time to put a huge disclaimer and say that this is the first book I did not finish because I did not enjoy it. Mm-hmm. I really didn't enjoy it. And I really wanted to enjoy it.
I'm really curious to hear why. You know, I know that you didn't finish it, but we have not talked about this until now. So
yeah, I'm
really curious to know what you didn't like about it, or what kind of held you back. I have some guesses, but I'll let you let you get into that.
Yeah, number one, Rahul is spelled wrong.
Right, of course. Big one.
But like I said, this was a serial. It actually was the first installment was published in September of 1909. So it's funny that the book actually takes place after, or the narrator lived after the beginning, the first chapter. But then it did finish in January 1910. I wonder if that was like an editing choice at the end or something, that when they made it the book, they made it 1910 or something.
Most likely the case.
There's also an entire chapter called L'Enveloppe Magique that they didn't even put in the book until the 2014 version.
Interesting.
Yes. That being said, most of the details in that chapter were put into other versions of the book. So when it was first published, they removed that chapter, but the details are elsewhere.
Right.
I like to refer to this practice of removing chapters as editing, and I think it's something Leroux could have used more of.
Ooh.
Another fun fact is that the Paris Opera House is a real place.
Right.
It's called Palais Garnier, which actually had a chandelier fall and kill one person. In the book, it kills one person as well and injure several others. It'll come as no surprise that inspired him, as well as rumors of ghosts. And then there's also a real cistern beneath Palais Garnier, where to this day, apparently, firefighters practice swimming in the dark.
Yes.
I thought that was really, really cool.
It's really interesting, yeah. It's definitely a weird place from the sound of it, so it's no surprise there was a story made from this.
Yes, and I do believe that the chandelier actually fell in the middle of a performance and everything. It sounds like that's a fairly accurate description of what happened, and people at the time did think at the Palais Garnier that this was a ghost, but it was just an electrical failure.
Right, okay. No surprise that they would have jumped straight to ghost, though.
No, we love a ghost story.
So one thing that's interesting to me, when you talked about that you didn't finish this and didn't love it, is that this is very much, in its stylization, at least, from what I can tell in the writing, as well as the way it's presented on screen. It's very much a gothic, type of story.
Yeah, it technically fits the definition of gothic horror. You have a big keystone of gothic horror is a young virginal woman.
Of course.
And I would say Christine Daae fits that perfectly.
Definitely.
They constantly talk about how pure she is and everything. So I actually thought I would really like it too. And when I read The King in Yellow, that was what inspired me to read The Phantom of the Opera. It didn't go as I thought.
What was the connection there?
So The King in Yellow is about a play that is driving people bonkers.
Right.
What's weird about The King in Yellow is it's actually an anthology of short stories, and eventually it completely forgets about The King in Yellow. We will talk about that when there are some. That's definitely one we're going to revisit one day. But it's about a play. And you never see it performed, I don't think you even really hear about many of the lines. There are a few named characters, but it's very, very sparse detail because no one survives, basically. And I thought this, theatrical horror was a really interesting genre. And I was really, compelled to read about that. And I thought Phantom of the Opera is kind of the iconic one.
Yeah.
It's a haunted opera house. It's about this young woman being basically exploited, and she gets kidnapped and almost dies, and there's all these weird mysteries going on. The book opens with a murder. There's a guy who is found hanged.
Right.
And it's just it has that spooky atmosphere and everything, but it completely ruins everything by not being Christine Daae's perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah.
She is going through all this emotion and tumult and everything, but she's surrounded by men who are just weird stalkers, including Raoul. And I actually stopped reading because I did not like Raoul.
Okay, I was wondering if he was... I know you had mentioned to me that there was a character that you absolutely could not stand.
It's Raoul.
And I was curious if that's who it was.
Yeah, so my issue with Raoul is that he constantly talks about wanting to save Christine Daae, but in the end, he's just talking over her and getting mad when she, doesn't want to answer a question, or when she asks him not to follow her. And then he's basically stalking her throughout at least the first half of the book. And then at the end, I did study the plot for this. Don't worry, I didn't read it. I did study though. At the end, she wants to marry him, and I genuinely don't see why they would love each other other than they happen to be high school sweethearts or childhood
Right, they knew
sweethearts.
each other from before, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it was really, really frustrating to watch this guy basically stalk a woman and try to be sympathetic.
Right.
And he's like, I must save her. And she's like, please leave me alone.
I'm trying to just be a singer. I don't want to be saved.
Yeah. And honestly, I say that the Phantom was one of the best men in the story because he made Christine's dreams come true. He supported her.
That's true.
And he was trying to help her be a singer. And sure, he was not the best guy. But he, and he also was a little bit of a stalker. Let's not forget that he also has stalker vibes going on.
Very much so.
But unlike Raoul, he's not literally chasing her down and screaming at her and then getting mad when she doesn't answer a question. And I guess you don't see a lot of that perspective. But every time she tries to open up to him, he just completely disregards her feelings. And it was so frustrating. And I was just I cannot read this anymore. There are other books from this era that treat women so much better. And I don't understand why Raoul likes her either.
Right.
Like, I get that you guys have some story with like a scarf falling in the water and he went and got it for her. And then what? Why do you like each other?
Right.
So there was nothing compelling about their relationship, and then he was a creepy stalker, and he would not let her talk or express herself. And whenever she said, I want to tell you about this, he would just derail everything.
I mean, that sounds like pretty typical behavior in 1910. Can you really expect much more?
I mean, yes, but also, like, I'm a big Sherlock Holmes fan, and, like, he's, like, never treated a woman that way. And that's an older book.
That was the other thing that I wanted to mention, is that I don't know that this story in particular was particularly inspired by, but I did see that Leroux was inspired by the writings of both Edgar Allan Poe and Arthur Conan Doyle.
Well, it doesn't show.
And I think that's more for some of his other works, and
Yeah.
that's like why it kind of has some of these like mystery gothic kind of, you know, influences coming together, but yeah, maybe he just didn't quite pull it off as well as they do, because those are both pretty excellent writers.
Yeah, no, those are amazing writers. And, like, I think I've talked about this before, and this is a big distinction I draw between 99% of mysteries and Sherlock Holmes, is that, and I'm not saying this is very present in Phantom of the Opera, but I have to bring it up whenever Sherlock Holmes is talked about in the genre of mystery. But people forget that when you have a character's perspective and you are in their head throughout the whole book, especially if it's first person, and then suddenly the character just doesn't give you information for no reason, like they figured it out, but they're not giving the reader information, it doesn't work 99% of the time. And the reason it works in Sherlock Holmes is because it's from Watson's perspective.
Right, and he's left in the dark
Yes,
sometimes.
and Watson will literally say, like, well, this dude ran in the room, said, I have an idea, and ran out of the room again, and I have no idea what's going on.
It's built into the world that he's going to be out of the loop sometimes.
Exactly. And
it's smart.
Yeah, that really drives me bonkers about other mysteries, and has nothing to do with Phantom of the Opera. But I'm very opinionated about Sherlock Holmes.
I see. Yes, of course.
We'll get there.
So, you know, all of this kind of, again, I don't really see people talking about the book all that much, you know, and it could just be that it's, you know, it's an older book, it's not as accessible to people, but there are a lot of books from that era and even before that really hold their place in history.
Sherlock Holmes?
Yeah, I mean, people still revisit these all the time, so it made me really think through, like, what is it about this story and this property that has kind of extended through the years? Like, why is it still so well known in 2024? Like, most people will have even heard of it, if not seen it in some form or watched it or something. And so it really, like, what do you think? I want to ask you first, like, what do you think kind of gives it its staying power?
I can't think of another IP that takes place in a theater. And yes, I say theater. I'm going to cover that right now. That's how I say that word.
Okay.
And I'm sorry.
Congratulations.
I can't think of another horror like that takes place in a theater. And I think it's a perfect setting for it. And I think that acting, specifically live stage productions, they're filled with superstition. Like, not saying Macbeth. Literally, someone will, like, attack you if you say that word in a theater, like backstage or something like that. Even the least superstitious of actors are going to be like, maybe don't say that. So that's my thought, is that I can't, like, even I mentioned The King in Yellow, but you never see a stage production of it.
Right.
So that's my thought, is that it takes place in a theater.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you to some extent. Like, that's, you know, it's an interesting concept, and there is, like, an underlying very interesting story, even if, like, you don't feel like it was necessarily presented in the best way in the book, or, you know, it didn't wrap itself up in the right way, or whatever the reason may be. But, I do feel like there is this kind of underlying thing that has led people to want to kind of toy with it on their own throughout the years. And then I would obviously say that, like, it would not be anywhere near its spot in the public consciousness if it wasn't for the musical. I mean, this is, you know, arguably one of the top 5 most successful musicals of all time. Like, it's been playing for years and years and years.
And would it have even become a movie or a musical if Gaston Leroux hadn't had successes already? Like, if this had been his first book,
he could have just gone into obscurity.
Yeah, he might have just faded away.
I mean, it's certainly possible that someone would have uncovered the story, but, you know, we already had this history of it being somewhat well known to certain, you know, artists and creators by having, you know, several versions of the movie made already and having this book kind of out there. So but yeah, I just, like, I feel like there's definitely, like, kind of a pre-Andrew Lloyd Webber and a post-Andrew Lloyd Webber version of this story, you know?
So I'm curious, when we talk about the 1925 and the 1943 versions of the movie, I really want to know what the differences there are. Because you said in the 25 version, it's very much about this makeup ability of this actor, right? So then, what was the 43 version? Were they pulling from the book? Were they inspired by the movie? Because obviously, Andrew Lloyd Webber, it's a musical. It's like it's completely different from the others.
Which I'm actually surprised how much, just from reading and from hearing you talk, I think that the musical actually does hit on quite a few of the main points.
Yeah, I think it does.
Which I've never seen the musical. I've never seen any version of the stage. You know, I've heard the music here and there. I've seen, you know, some, maybe a quick recording clip or something, but I've never, like, gone to a showing of this production.
Like a live production,
right. So, you know, and even the movie I had only seen maybe clips here and there. I know I had seen parts of it. It just never interested me. Like, I have many family members who are obsessed with that movie. You know,
I believe it.
Yeah, and some other friends and people I've known throughout the years, you know, that really, really love it. And so, like, it's definitely been around, but it's not something I ever, like, delved into on my own.
Yeah.
So, you know, all of these things, they kind of are, they share a lot of these same points, but they deviate in their own ways. So yes, like, that was the purpose of the 1925 one.
Yeah.
At least that's what kind of got it rolling. Lon Chaney was very popular at the time. You know, they knew that he was going to be the star in it, and they kind of built it around that. But it is more than that. It is actually, from what I can tell, a quite faithful telling of the story. There are some differences. Like, all of these film versions, the murder doesn't happen until later on. Like, the man that they find hanged, that doesn't happen until later on.
Yeah.
And I think that's...
Bouquet. That's his name. Bouquet.
I think that's mostly in a way to kind of, you know, spread out and kind of ratchet up the mystery at first.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
None of them really, you know, you're talking about the reveal straight out of the gate about this being a man. There is some amount of mystery in all of the films, but it doesn't really make a big deal out of that. There's the legend of the Phantom that's kind of being gossiped about. And, you know, there's certain strange happenings that are going on and whatever. And then Christine kind of has her own relationship with, you know, this spirit or angel.
Angel of music.
Yeah.
So, completely stopping your point and
Thank you.
Veering to the side. This will connect, I promise. So what I have seen is basically universally in the movies, the Phantom is this man with a, like, white mask on. Yeah. In some form or another. I believe it's the classic that we know is the musical where it's like a half mask, where it covers one side of his face. Then the 20s and 40s, what do the masks look like? So the 20s one is interesting. It is kind of this, like, you know, partial mask up on the top, just covering the eyes and, like, part of the nose. Okay, like almost like a masquerade mask. Right. You know, very similar on the top to what we're used to for that imagery. But then on the bottom, it's almost this, like, it looks like it's almost just like hanging skin. It's kind of weird. It's not, like, super creepy, the mask itself, but... yeah, I don't know. There's something that looks a little more unnatural about it. Yeah. You know, it's not quite as clean and polished as some of the other ones. But the true horror of it is, you know, when the mask is removed. Oh, I see. I just looked it up. It looks almost like there's these Italian masks that have they're made specifically so you can eat and drink.
Right.
And so they have this big almost duck bill that comes out of, so it covers from your forehead down to basically your whole face. But right at the nose, it just goes out into a point.
Right.
So this one, instead of going out into a point, it almost just like
it
flops.
just drapes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It is interesting, but it really caught me as like, it almost looks like his like face is hanging off, you know, especially in like kind of the grainy 1925 presentation of it. I did find it quite striking.
Yes, it is very striking.
Yeah.
And then the 1940s version.
So this one, and this is also the one that deviates. So I believe in the book he is disfigured from birth, right?
Yes.
So that is the case in both the 1925 version as well as the musical. He's kind of just like an orphan or someone, you know, he's kind of lived beneath the Paris Opera House for a long time. You know, the story changes a little bit based on, you know, some of his childhood and stuff like that. But for the most part, he was born disfigured.
Yes.
In 1943 version, it happens during the movie.
Interesting.
So in this case, he's still a man named Eric, but they refer to him as Claudin the whole time.
That's more interesting.
Yeah. And so...
I'm sorry,
his name is Eric Claudin.
A dude named Eric
Yeah.
is haunting
Look,
you.
he's just a dude living in the sewers, man. Like, leave him alone. Yeah, that's Eric. Like, leave him be.
Yeah, that's Eric. He's our sewer ghoul.
Yeah, exactly. So in this one, Eric is just... he's a violinist in the pit orchestra for the production. So that's why I find the changes in this one quite interesting. And so he ends up, you know, he's like fawning over Christine in a way, but it's quite different than the like pure obsession that happens in the other versions. He kind of just admires her and wants to see her succeed. And there's certainly like a romantic longing, but it's not quite as intense as in the other versions.
Yeah.
So he kind of, you know, has been helping her along. Instead of him being the one that trains her as kind of this mystery angel, he just buys her voice lessons and like, you know, helps her along in her career. And so eventually he gets fired by the orchestra. I can't remember the exact reason why. And so he's kind of destitute at this point because he's basically given all of his money to her to help fund voice lessons. So his like kind of last ditch effort is he's been working on this piano concerto on his own for a couple of years. And so he decides to present this to a producer and try to sell it. And so they actually are quite interested in it, but there's a misunderstanding. And so he comes in and he's being told by the producer himself that he doesn't know who he is, he's not interested. And then there's another man that's actually in charge of, you know, making these decisions. And he's very interested in it. And he's actually in the other room sharing how great he thinks this piece is with somebody. I think it's a quite famous composer. I can't remember who it's meant to be. But, you know, he's sharing this with somebody and saying that he wants him to perform it. And so Claudin comes in and hears this exchange going on and then kind of gets into it with this producer. And he ends up mistakenly thinking that he has tried to steal his work and present it as his own.
Oh.
So this is kind of when he snaps. So he then tries to succeeds in murdering the producer by strangling him. And then there is someone else, like his kind of assistant is there, and she grabs a vat of acid and throws it on his face.
There's a convenient vat of acid.
There is a vat of acid. No, it's like a, it's not a vat. It's like that she goes over to the sink. I guess it's like a kitchen or something. And there's just kind of this like tray of, you know, there's no explanation for why it's there.
Okay, we're going to say it's cleaning fluid or something.
But either way.
That was the era of caustic cleaning fluids.
Exactly. Nothing was safe. You're just like going at it with like things that could burn your skin off.
Yeah. So
his face, you know, becomes disfigured in this way, and he kind of goes into hiding at this point and starts wearing a mask.
And his mask covers everything but his mouth and chin.
Yes. However, his disfigurement is much like the musical and such. It is only on one side of his face. Yeah. He just wears the kind of traditional masquerade mask.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't even call this a traditional masquerade mask. It's like bigger. It's Yeah, it's bigger, and it just, like, it's like if you had a full face mask, but you just cut off, like, an arc over your mouth and chin.
Right.
Kind of from one point of your jaw to the other. It's really hard to describe these, like, without just drawing them or showing it to someone.
Yes, of course. I mean, certainly you can go look these up.
Yes.
It's definitely worth doing.
Yeah. They are very, especially that 1920s one. I suggest looking it up, because that one is really hard to do justice.
Yeah.
But, so what's interesting in the book is they constantly talk about him having a skull face and, like, burning eyes. I would say it's nothing like any of the masks that are in the movies.
Well, this is what I want to talk about with the 1925 version. The mask itself is not the interesting thing about him.
Yeah.
So in all of these, it's shared, and I don't know if this happens in the book, but there's kind of a moment at some point in the story where Christine, while he's distracted in some way, usually performing or playing the piano, she goes and removes the mask, and this is where she finally sees him, as he is. Yeah. And so, of course, all of these have their different, of course, the acid, his face is just kind of messed up. It's very similar to what Gerard Butler looks like in the newer one. But in the 1925 one, the actual makeup that Lon Chaney did that made it so interesting is this very skull-like appearance.
Yeah, he looks like Nosferatu almost.
He kind of does, yeah. And it's, it's hard not to watch it and, find it a bit comical, especially at the reveal.
Yeah.
Because they both just kind of give these, shocked, oh, faces, But at the same time, I actually found it, kind of scary.
Yeah.
And, of course, audiences in 1925 also found this very scary. There's all these stories of people, and who knows how much this has been played up over the years. But there's all these stories of people, fainting and screaming in the theaters and running away and all these things, So I do feel like it was very, very striking appearance, something especially a decade into films being made and seen regularly, not something that people had probably seen much to that point.
No, it is really, while we were talking about the masks, I was looking them up, and that was one image that came up, was the makeup, and I thought it was really fascinating, and that's why it really does almost look like Nosferatu. Yeah. And there's even a photo of him with his hands up, and he really looks like Nosferatu. It's really funny.
I feel like that version is probably the closest to how it's described in the book.
So I don't know how his face is described in the book.
You didn't get that far.
Now that I am thinking about it, the skull face thing is just what everyone says about him constantly. Right. And I know he wears a mask, and I know there's a scene where Christine takes the mask off and goes, ugh! And I just, I don't know, what he looks like, but like you were saying, it is a disfigurement from birth.
Yes.
His own mother wouldn't kiss him. Right. She would run away from him. In the book, he becomes, his father was a contractor. So he became a contractor, but he would create these fun houses. And that's why he was able to apply that to the Paris Opera House. And put all these trap doors and revolving mirrors and find a way to stay there.
I feel like that's an interesting detail that's not present in the films.
It's a very interesting detail. It's probably the coolest thing about him in the book, But yeah, and people talk about how he there are fireballs and all this stuff. It turns out he's just a master illusionist because of all of his experience with fun houses and stuff like that. Which, again, is kind of a cool detail if you don't know it's some dude and you immediately know, well, then it has to be an illusion.
Yeah.
So, that's, again, something I don't like about the book. But I think it's really cool that he specifically designed these passages while working on the opera house so that he could hide there. And obviously the underground lake is the cistern. It's the same thing.
Right.
But, yeah, so he looks a little bit different, I would say, and that's what they keep saying when I assume he's wearing a mask. But they always say he has these glowing eyes, or fiery eyes, I think. And that was, again, really interesting. I think Leroux went a little bit far, which is where film as a format almost helped.
Yes.
Is that it forces you to be a little bit realistic in a way.
Yeah.
You have to, especially in the 20s, and 40s versions, but granted the Gerard Butler version, whenever that came out, didn't...
2004.
2004. Did not have a lot of CGI or anything like that anyway. Sure. But if you're forced to create something that you can actually create. So you can't have your CGI alien monster fight, right? Where people are like, this is unbelievable. So the book went too unbelievable, in my opinion, and didn't accept enough that either this has to be a ghost that we think is a ghost and slowly learn is an illusionist, or, you know, we can't have him being like, and he has fireballs. And then you're like, what?
I mean, so I think that's one of the things that makes, like, books more fun, though, right? Is that you're kind of creating this, you're not being forced to show it, so you can make it this kind of ever morphing, you know, kind of presentation. So it's like, to me, that's almost just like, these are the stories that people tell about it. These are like the quick glimpse that somebody gets.
Yes.
And it scares them in their mind, tells them all these things that they saw, you know. So
yes.
To me, it would be unreal in a way that you can't portray on screen the same way.
And I think that is a wonderful strength about books, is that you can do things that movies really have to use CGI for, and I can do it in like 10 words. Mm-hmm. But when you open the book by saying this is a man, you're defeating some of the suspense. And then they end the book by explaining how it all worked. So no one's figuring this shit out throughout the book. They go, here's what happened at the beginning. They talk about the little story, and then at the end he goes, and he was an illusionist, and he was disfigured from birth. And you're like, dude,
right?
Why can't we be learning about that?
Okay, so this is another point I want to touch on, right? The whole illusionist thing.
Yeah.
So you're saying he, you know, learned all of these kind of, he was a contractor, he learned all these, like, fun house things, whatever. Is there not also a portion where he, like, went and trained as in, like, Iran or something? Is there not,
yeah, he's
like,
in Persia. Yeah. They even refer to some different things. But he goes to Persia for a while, and he builds... They call them torture chambers, actually, but they're like mirror mazes and like mirror rooms, which is why I call them fun houses, because we would not call that a torture chamber nowadays. Very different connotation. But yes, he does go to Persia and train there, and then comes back. And that's, I think it's Persia and Turkey are the places where he learns a lot of those skills.
Okay. So that's one big point that is different in every film version. None of them include that. The 25 version is probably the closest, where there's, you know, he learns from this person. He's not a Persian man, like he's just kind of...
Oh, there's also the Persian.
The Persian, right.
Yeah.
So this is the guy that's, you know, kind of connected to that, where he learns many of these things.
Yeah.
And so he has this kind of figure in the 1925 version, but it's much more localized. It's like he went to some island or something for a little bit and trained and did something, and then he comes back.
All I'm picturing is that there's like an island like in the middle of a lake, and everyone's like, what's Eric doing today? That's a lot of mirrors.
Is that Eric? Wait, there's 40 of him.
Someone should check on him.
And then, of course, in the 1943 version, there's none of that really, because it happens throughout the course of the film, right?
Yeah, it's completely different. And he's a musician.
Right. And then in the musical and the 2004 version, it's something quite different as well. He's, what happens in that one? Oh, the owner of the opera, like, found him when he was a boy. He had been, like, beaten and abandoned or something like that. And she, like, brings him in, and she trains him to become a musician.
Okay.
Right, so he's, like, kind of the secret. Like, you kind of see throughout the movie, and I think all this is included in the theater version. I'm not quite sure, but... you know, you kind of see him, like, basically he's on the payroll on the opera.
Okay.
You know, he gets a check every month, and then when the new owners come in, they stop paying him, and that's
happens.
part of, right, so that's part of what, like, triggers all of this happening, along with Christine, of course.
Yes, so that happens in the book, too, where he has box 5 or something like that, and then they give away box 5 or whatever, and then he drops the chandelier, and he kills the woman who's like, she's like the valet or housekeeper or something of one of the managers, and it's the first time she's ever gone to an opera.
Oh my.
And the chandelier falls on her and kills her.
Tough luck.
Yeah, it really sucks for her, but it's honestly kind of hilarious. But yeah, so that's very similar. And he does play violin in the book.
Well, because he's still like, he's very musical, right?
Yeah.
Like he's still teaching her.
Yes,
and, you know.
he's the reason she becomes such an amazing singer.
Talk to me a little bit about how does she think of him in the book? Like how Christine, like does she know about him from the get-go? Does she kind of learn over the course of time?
Well, this is a great time when it would have been from her perspective, right?
Sure.
Like, that sentence came out really weird. This would have been great if it was from her perspective. Because you don't really see a lot of that progression. You see her talking to Raoul and Raoul being like, balderdash! And we're like, but I want to hear her side of things,
because he's
Raoul.
Kind of just ignoring everything she says anyway.
And he's like convinced that she's completely wrong. And so
what is she saying to him?
So she's saying that like there's an angel of music and he's teaching her to sing and all this stuff. And then he tells her to like go to her father's grave and there he'll play for her, and he does. And so I think Raoul figures out he is a man before Christine, but Christine also does start to admit that she's afraid of him. Yeah. Again, Raoul is like off in his own world, and it's like, wow, you're being really helpful right now. This book would be so much shorter if you just listened to her. But yeah, so I think it takes her a little while to figure out that he is a man, and I don't know when exactly it happens. But I do know that, like, she gets kidnapped by him and ends up in his lair, and all of that. So
all of those are much the same.
Yeah, but I think the musical is fairly faithful to the book.
On those points, I think so, yeah.
I think that it's one of those instances of, like, the book is longer than the movie, so you simply have to cut stuff out,
right.
You know? So you can't do all of this stuff.
Well, it certainly doesn't feel like the 2004 version is any shorter than the book.
I wouldn't know. I didn't finish the book. I've had this copy of the book sitting on the floor next to my bed for a while now, and I'm really excited to give it away. Like, really excited.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But yeah, so I don't know. Raoul definitely figures out that he's a man before Christine, but Christine is like, I'm terrified. And he's like, I'm going to go beat this dude up. And she's like, please don't. And he's like, I'm going to go beat this dude up. And she's like, don't talk to me. Like, she's like, you're making it way worse.
Yes, right. Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like I would have been quite frustrated by Raoul in the books too, because his portrayal is quite different in all of the movies.
I remember him in the musical being like kind of soft and tender.
He's very soft and tender.
And I think that's what he needed, which is funny because I still didn't like the movie. And you didn't really like the movie.
But he's arguably the best character. In other words, the movie is frustrating almost because of how nice he is. Because it's trying to present this kind of back and forth between, like, you know, does she want to be with Eric? Does she want to be with Raoul? You know, which one does she choose? Like, that's kind of the crux of the film, right? Yeah. Except for, like, it's a very obvious choice to anyone that's watching, because Raoul is just nothing but sweet and tender and wonderful, and listens to her and also wants to help her and do all these things. You know, even in the other versions of the film, like the 1925 one, he is trying to, like, pull her away from the opera. Yeah. You know, and it's not necessarily out of any malicious intent. Yeah. It's just kind of like he feels like she's not safe there, and he's worried about her talking to this angel and all these things, you know, so it's like, it's not necessarily bad. But in this other version, he is just like a patron of the opera. They were also childhood sweethearts. He comes back into her life. He just like fawns over her, and you know, there's really nothing bad that he ever does throughout the course of the film. So it's just kind of like, what are we doing here? Like,
he feels a little bit like white bread.
I mean, sure.
Okay. That makes sense. And that's kind of how I remember him, because I literally can't even picture the actor who plays him.
It's Patrick Wilson, who looks very different in this movie. He looks exactly like Wes Anderson in this movie.
Let me look this up. Off to Google. Oh, it is. Yeah, it was Patrick Wilson.
Yeah,
oh my
which I was like shocked to see that, because I did not remember that was him. I just don't associate him with roles like that at all. But yeah, he has this kind of like, you know, shoulder length hair, and it's just kind of, I mean, like, literally look at a picture of Wes Anderson and tell me that they don't look exactly the same.
Wes Anderson. I wish I had a really loud keyboard so everyone could hear me. Oh my gosh.
Like 1-to-1. Literally, they cast Wes Anderson to play this role.
That's even part their hair.
I know, it's exactly the same.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny.
I just could not stop seeing that the entire movie.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that would be really distracting to me too.
But it is, and it's like, it's an interesting kind of back and forth, and like, yeah, like the Phantom like has his moments of sweetness and whatever, but it's kind of just like this very silly romance, you know. It doesn't really I like what it's trying to do, but it fails on every front to do it, in my opinion.
I have a belief, and I like musicals.
Me too.
But I have a belief that some of these really, really popular musicals are not loved because of their story. They're loved because of the music.
Of course.
And I think Phantom of the Opera is one of those.
Because it feels... I don't even really love the music in it, though, to be honest. I love the tone, like the, you know, the kind of the main theme. Like, that's pretty cool, but like...
Yeah, it is. I mean, I feel the way about... There are some other musicals, which I'm not going to voice another controversial opinion today.
Oh, boy.
That I don't love, and I don't love the story, and I don't necessarily...
Come on, let's hear it. Just name drop it.
Wicked.
Oh, okay. Well,
I don't like Wicked. My father doesn't like Wicked either. And it's just like, I don't really care for the story. I don't really care for the music. I think Idina Menzel, I believe that's how you say her name, amazing singer. Mm-hmm. Didn't like Frozen either, to be honest, because I also think that story is bad. I'm so sorry, Idina. I know it's not you. You are fine. But I think that there's just this little... These musicals forget to flesh out a story, and they focus so much on music. And honestly, with a musical, it's even harder because you are, again, cutting down on the amount of time you have to present in a story.
True.
So when you take a movie and then you turn it into a book, you go from, like, honestly, like 20 hours, not 20 hours, let's say like 7 hours to like 2 hours.
Yeah.
And then when you do a musical, you're cutting that down to like maybe like an hour and a half, an hour.
Well, it depends. They're all usually quite long because, you know.
Exactly. But you're taking out huge chunks of time. So I think that there needs to be this thought of simplifying stories, but still making them compelling, which is very possible. Yeah. People write short stories that take 20 minutes to read, and they're fun.
There's a lot of wasted time in the film version, the 2004 version. Like there's a lot of back and forth that doesn't need to happen. Yeah. There's these very long sequences. Like they waste a lot of precious time that could have been spent on something else.
It feels like Andrew Lloyd Webber knew that Raoul was insufferable and said, like, okay, well, we have to make him likable. And he went the complete opposite direction and created, like, the least offensive character ever. Sure. But that makes you lose a lot of interest in that, like, maybe you needed a little bit of that rough edge on Raoul to make her go back and forth.
Right.
Whereas my understanding of the book is a lot of that back and forth is, well, because he's annoying and keeps telling her, like, talking over her, and then she's like, please stop. So you understand, like, I guess I see the purpose of that almost, in that that's what keeps pushing her back to the Angel of Music, is that Raoul is an asshole. But again, it should have been from her perspective, because I think her warring emotions would have been fascinating. Is Phantom of the Opera public domain yet?
I know that it became public domain in the 50s.
So then it must be public domain.
I'm assuming it is, yeah.
Okay.
But I imagine that I would think that the whole concept itself is public domain, the story itself and the characters, but then, like, Andrew Lloyd Webber probably has some sort of rights to his own production.
Yes.
You know?
Yes, you couldn't just do the production without getting those rights, but you could do a retelling from Christine's perspective. Yes. I was just thinking that would be really cool.
And, you know, that's the thing, that all of these film adaptations, they are shared perspective. Like, it's mostly following Christine the whole time. You have some moments here and there with the other people, but, you know.
Which it really needs, because she's the one going through this strife. Raoul is an outsider who's just kind of following her around. And you could do a dual perspective, which is more of a book term than a movie term, where you follow both Raoul and Christine, and you see how her strife is affecting him. But again, I don't know why they're together or what their relationship...
It just seems like a questionable choice in perspective.
And really in the book, a lot of the back and forth is because our dude Eric is like, I'm going to blow up the opera house if you don't marry me. And like, oh, I'm going to kill these people if you don't marry me.
Right.
And that's a little bit more compelling for her to be like, well, I think I want to stay with him.
Right.
But then, of course, at the end, he's like, I've never felt love like this. I'm dying of love. You must be free, Christine. Just come back and place a ring on my finger that I gave to you once I die.
Right.
But he literally dies of love.
Yes.
Is that how he dies in the others?
No, absolutely not. Well, okay, so that's like, it's much... Funny enough, the musical version is probably the closest to that ending.
Again, the musical sounds like it's almost the most faithful.
No, the 1925 overall is definitely the most faithful.
Really? Okay.
Yes. It just, the musical manages to hit on a lot of beats in a similar way.
Okay.
But it's definitely not the most directly faithful. Because it moves things out of order and different things like that. But yeah, so the ending of the 25 version definitely changes things quite a bit. So they had multiple versions of this, and it was mostly through audience testing that they decided to make some of these changes.
Okay.
So like the whole thing of like the whole, going to Persia and all this stuff, that was changed because it was not of interest to anybody. And then the ending they found too like boring, basically. So they did record an ending, or at least had it in the original script of it basically to end the same way. But they wanted something more exciting. Like that's what the audiences were after. I think especially after the whole thrill of the story up to that point, they weren't really after this kind of like, soft, easy ending.
It's like, oh my God, what is she gonna do? She's has to marry this guy, and then he's like, it's like, how anticlimactic is that? And she needs to like stab him in the face or something.
As far as that goes, like I actually think that it's goofy as all hell, but I do think that the 2004 version handles that kind of ending fairly well. Yeah. There's this kind of like, there's this moment where she finally like decides to kiss him, and they've already made up their mind that she's going with Raoul instead. Yeah. And he's okay with that. He's basically already told them that's okay. Yeah. But she like has this moment of tenderness with him, and he kind of just accepts like, okay, no one has shown me this in my entire life.
In the book.
And that is when he decides like, you just go. However, what they do a little bit better is that it's implied that he lives on. So
in the 2004.
In the 2004 version. So he, like, lets them go, they escape, whatever, they live their lives, and then it shows Raoul going to her grave years later. I believe this is, like, it's set in 1870, and then this is in 1910. He's going to her, or somewhere around that time. Going to her grave, and then he finds, when he leaves the music box at her grave, he finds a rose with the ring that the Phantom had given her, implying that, he was still alive and was still, like, caring for her in his own way. Yeah. So I thought that was maybe a little more interesting.
Yeah, that is
of a way to handle it, rather than just, like, I am overcome with love and I must die.
Goodbye, cruel world.
Yes, so it's much less melodramatic, which is interesting for a very melodramatic movie. Yeah. But I do think that was handled well. But that's very different than the 1925 version. In the 1925 version, a mob basically ensues and hunts him down and throws his body into the Seine.
It's almost like Frankenstein.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, when you said monster movies and stuff, I was thinking about like Frankenstein, Dracula.
I mean, the success of that movie is basically what led them to do all of those early 30s monster movies.
Interesting.
It was the first one, and it basically was the one that allowed Universal to start making all of these.
That's really
it generated interest for it.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, so you probably wouldn't have things like Bela Lugosi's Dracula and all these things if it was not for this movie.
Yeah, there was also, so I'm reading this book called Nightmare Fuel by Nina Nesseth. I believe that's how she pronounces her name. And, there was like a cultural fear of monsters at the time. Like that's part of that huge resurgence. But I didn't realize that Phantom of the Opera was kind of a huge part of that.
Definitely. Yeah. And I mean, it's really interesting too, because like full on horror didn't start, until a little bit later, but it's like the silent film era gave so much of the foundation for horror films. Yeah. And it's really interesting to watch things like this and to see how it works that well. And it's such a great way of presenting it, because it's so much, you know, focused on the music itself, changing the emotion of the scene and the tone. And there's this, in this 25 version, there's just this beautiful piano music throughout the whole thing, and it goes from kind of very uplifting to haunting, and it's really well done. And some of it is a little out of place at times. It's not perfect, but I really, really enjoyed it. It helps carry through this, you know, hour and 45 minute of silent film really well, along with just how, you know, obviously in modern day you would look at it as overacting, but just like the way that they have to have these big reactions to things.
That was the era of still relying on stage plays, and they didn't have the huge screens like we have now.
Yeah, so you see these really big reactions, and it's like I said, it's like a little goofy in some ways, but it's also like, it's really impressive, and it also like really sets the tone well. Like I was very impressed by Mary Philbin, I think is who plays. Mary Philbin plays Christine in that version, and her facial expressions are just fantastic.
That's awesome. I actually really want to watch the 25 and 43 version now. Yeah. I'm quite intrigued.
I definitely enjoyed those two the most. And mostly the 43 version I just liked because of how it incorporated so many of the things, but it did it in such a different way. I want to talk a little bit more about some of that too, because it does, you know, all of these kind of share this like love triangle, right? Like that's kind of the central piece between her and the Phantom and Raoul, right?
Yeah.
The 43 version really twists this, because like I said, the Phantom, Claudin, he's not quite the same like obsessive person. And so he does, like, once he becomes very angered and feels like people have wronged him more, like, he does end up kidnapping her in some of those same story points. But the actual love triangle is done completely differently. It's actually a guy named Anatole, who is a baritone singer in the group.
Okay.
And also Raoul, but in this version, Raoul is a police inspector.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. And the three of them together, it's a completely different tone from the rest of the film. It almost turns into this like screwball comedy act between the three of them, where they're these two very similar looking men. It's almost impossible to distinguish them outside of the clothes that they're wearing. They both have these like little pencil stashes, and they're like the same height. Like that's really quite funny.
Wow.
And so they're both like, you know, I don't believe she's supposed to have known Raoul from birth, or, you know, from childhood like she does in the other versions, but she's like, basically he's trying to court her, but she has this very close relationship with Anatoly, and they practice together a lot and all these things, and so he's also trying to like kind of get his way in there.
Oh my gosh.
So it's just these very funny scenes of them like next to each other, like both saying the same thing at the same time, or like trying to be polite with each other, but not, you know, very clearly not actually believing that, you know, or trying. There's multiple scenes where they try to like exit the door at the same time, and they're like, after you, no, after you, no, after you.
That's funny.
It turns into this very different thing, and so it's like, yeah, to some extent, it's like completely off base from like the rest of the story and stuff. But I found it quite entertaining.
It almost sounds like that the 1943 version said, okay, here's this concept that's cool. Let's use the name so that we can use similar ideas, but let's make a different movie.
Right.
Let's make something that's still about a singer, still trying to be in the theater. A lot of these similar characters, but let's just completely reinvent this. And they made a different movie that's really fun and knows when to lean into comedy and when to lean into weird and when to lean into horror, and just it's not Phantom of the Opera in a way, but it is
at the same time. Yeah, it hits. I mean, it's still like, you know, he does murder some people. He like drops the chandelier on the crowd. Like some of these things still happen, you know. But and maybe it was also just because I watched all three of these movies back to back to back. So
last night,
and so all of this is very fresh. But so I did them in the order they were released. Not even I felt like it was the way to do it. Not even just because it was chronological, but just like in tone, I felt like it was the way to do it.
Okay.
And I think I was right, because it kind of, that one being different, the 43 version being so different, kind of broke it all up.
Yeah.
You know, and made it fun. And it was also kind of a bridge, because you have this, you know, very dark gothic look in the 25 version.
Yeah.
And then you get to this, you know, the 1943 version, it was shot in Technicolor.
Yeah.
It's very bright, very elaborate kind of stage thing. They have these, it's not a musical, but they do have these, you know, sections of just showing the performances and people practicing and singing and playing and all these things. And so it is very much, you know, very musical.
I think you couldn't have a Phantom of the Opera movie with sound that doesn't have singing in it. And it doesn't have to be a musical, like you said, but it just, like, how can you do that? Like, how can it be about anything to do with the opera if there's no singing?
Exactly, yeah. So, it does go a little far with it sometimes, but it's certainly not a perfect movie. But I did really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Going on that same thing, again, I'm not, like, a huge fan of the music. I don't know if I would like the stage production or not. I feel like it's, like, way more fitting the way it's presented.
The Andrew Lloyd Webber version.
Yes. Yeah. Like, I feel like it would be much more interesting to watch on stage. Yeah. Because in the film, it just feels so goofy and over the top and just kind of ridiculous. And I don't know how much of that is from, like, the intent of I feel like that's partially just how that production is. Yeah. But I also wonder how much of that was filmmaking choices and stuff. Because this film, I will just say, it was directed by Joel Schumacher. Okay. Who you may know as blessing us in this world with the Batman nipples in Batman and Robin.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
You think that was Joel Schumacher that blessed us with those nipples?
He was the one that chose.
He was the one that chose.
Your family may or may not have had some part to play in the realization of this dream.
This is accurate, unfortunately.
However, this was from the dark recesses of the mind of Joel Schumacher. Okay?
Oh my gosh, why could I would...
This is a man that made Mr. Freeze play hockey with Batman. Like, you know, this is the same kind of vibes that we're getting in this 2004 version.
You know, this is complete aside, but because we're talking about this director, I think it would be funny. My father is 6'4", right? Yes. And he, as we have now stated, has worked on the Batman and Robin movie. And he and the family had a part in the Batman nipples. Not really, but basically, I used to think Chris O'Donnell was really cute. That's the guy who plays Robin. Yes. And my dad would just be like, meh, he's kind of short. You're
like everybody's kind of short to you.
You're 6'4". Like, I have no concept of what tall is because of your existence. Like,
yeah, you can't just call people out like that. Like, I am a tall man. Like, there's no denying that.
Yeah, you're 6'2".
I'm not gonna come after the short kings of the world. Okay?
No, we love them. No, it's just, I think I was quite young at the time, and my dad was just trying to temper my expectations or something, because he was like, that dude is standing on a box right now. Uma Thurman towers over him. But yeah, so that's just a fun little aside. But I think part of what works on the stage production versus the movie, going back to what we're supposed to be talking about, is that when you have a stage production that does things like has water and someone rowing through the water,
it feels so much more alive.
Because you're there and you're impressed by the set. Yes. You're amazed by their technical abilities. You're not necessarily suspending your disbelief to be like, ooh, I'm in the middle of an opera house and then there's a lake at the bottom. You know you're in a theater, but you're taking time to either suspend your disbelief or just appreciate the pure artistry of what you're seeing and how fantastic it is and how they have to convey this to the person in the front row, to the person in the back row, and how sometimes they involve you in the stories. Yes. Like, a play I both want to see but also don't want to see because apparently it's terrifying is The Woman in Black, where the actors will just appear in the audience.
Oh, I would love to see that.
Right? So you can do these things that are cheesy, like having a dramatic, he's rowing through the cistern and it's his like big motions and he's singing while doing it. And it's a completely different experience when you see that on stage where there's actually maybe not even water. but they have these cool moving set pieces, versus in a movie when he's rowing across a pool and you're like,
it's just not the same.
It's not the same.
And it's very good. I mean, this particular scene you're referencing, this is where they do, like, the Phantom of the Opera song.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I can't, like, okay, yes, the Phantom of the Opera is here. Got it.
And also, inside my mind, got it. And also, if you're in the theater and you're hearing them sing like that live, completely different impact.
Well, and this also comes down to the point of, in a theater, you have people who are trained to sing.
I.e. Idina Menzel.
In movies, that is often not the case. Now, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time here shit-talking Gerard Butler or his singing abilities, but let's be honest, it's not that good.
Is he not very... I don't remember.
It's, I've heard for years about how bad it is and people hate it, and, like, I feel like it could be worse. It's certainly not good. It is thoroughly fine, and there's definitely some times where it's just like, I don't know about that.
And I think the problem also with the Phantom is this guy's like a baritone, I believe.
Yeah.
You gotta be able to sing.
And he doesn't really get into the real deep,
Yeah.
Like, he can't really do that.
You need one of those, oh my gosh. Honestly, I would like to see that song performed live because it's this absolute soprano and a baritone.
Yes.
It's like a very interesting contrast, and she has to hit some wild notes.
Well, and I think that Emmy Rossum actually does a really good job in this movie.
Yeah.
And, that's the other thing that's just like, you're not really selling me on the whole back and forth thing, because then it's like, okay, she's like enthralled by the music. Okay, cool. Like, yes, the Phantom as a character, he has taught her so much. Like, he clearly is very musically talented, all these things.
Yeah.
But then, like, in the scenes of them singing together, it's just like, okay, Gerard Butler is here. And then the two of them, Emmy Rossum and Patrick Wilson, have their scenes together. And they both sing very well. And they're just like, wow, like, this is great. So it's just like,
I almost think that this is a movie which should be made by Broadway professionals. Like, that's not to knock on Patrick Wilson or Emmy Rossum, but I bet if you got some real, not even Broadway, but like opera singers doing that, it would just blow you out of the water.
Yes.
Because you're reminded, and I think that's part of why Wicked and Frozen have been so popular, is that
it's an actual
Idina Menzel can
singer.
sing. She has an amazing voice.
Yeah.
And she's proved herself live, and now she's proved herself with voice acting. And I'm honestly really, really excited for her voice acting career because she's so amazing.
Yeah.
So.
It's really cool. But yeah, I think that's a huge thing. And the thing about it is, like, I don't know. It's hard for me to put into words why this movie didn't work so well for me, because, I mean, I think part of it is just kind of the I don't know, it's just like too grandiose and too stylized and kind of, I don't know, there's something about it that doesn't do it for me that, like I said, I think would work better on stage for many of the reasons that you said. But at the same time, it's not like I'm against that. Like, there's tons of people out there which I am no, like, expert of the theater or stage play, but like the theater. But there are many people who believe that, theater was single-handedly murdered by people like Andrew Lloyd Webber. So, like, that he, like, came in and just destroyed it with his, like, sickly, like, just, like, grandiose nonsense. Kind of kitschy, like, people just don't like it. And I can see that to one extent. But then at the same time, like, I do like things like that sometimes. Like, I like both stage productions of Les Mis as well as the movie. And it's like, that's also full of it's not a particularly well done story in terms of the movie. There's a cast of people who some of them can sing and some of them really can't.
Yeah.
And I still love it. So I don't know what it is about Phantom that just didn't do it for me. I think maybe because the point of it is the romance and that's not handled well. Whereas in Les Mis, you have this like whole, like the revolution and all this shit going on. And it's just like, I don't know, more encapsulating, but.
Yeah. Well, I'm also thinking about Moulin Rouge right now. Mm-hmm. And how that feels like a stage production when you're watching it.
Right.
Which is good. And I mean, at times, it doesn't always. But they really lean into that, and then they also really lean into why film is so fun with these like cool shots where they zoom out really far,
Right,
and you have a tiny little man sitting on a window, It
really uses the medium.
Yeah, and so it plays with that feeling you get in a theater where you're like, this is so grand, but what is actually feeling grand is you're watching them pull the camera out from these tiny little details to seeing every little diamond on a fishnet stocking to suddenly Ewan McGregor is alone in the middle of this world singing his heart out, and he's just tiny in the middle of the screen.
Right, yeah.
And I think when you're gonna, I think Moulin Rouge was written for film, but
yes,
when you take that like film versus theater, you have to play with what makes film feel grand.
Yes.
And it's that ability to immerse you by like close shots and far shots and playing with angles and spinning. And it almost sounds like when they made Phantom of the Opera, which again, I haven't seen for a while, but they kind of said, how do we film the play production?
I think that's essentially it. Like, let's do a very like one-to-one kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there are changes in it. I don't think any of them are like extraordinarily different or anything, but like, yeah, I think that it is just that general, like, he just didn't approach it from the right standpoint of like, this is how you make a film version that captures the same thing.
Yeah.
But from a technical standpoint, like, yes, he did adapt the play.
Yeah. And it is one of, again, this is where we talk about adaptations so much, where I always say adapt a movie to a book, it's going to look completely different. There's nothing you can do about that. You can never be 100% faithful to the book unless you want to create like a long mini series or something. And again, you're still dealing with like actors who look different, or then you have to do CGI, there's so many things you have to balance that typically it's best to adapt it rather than be entirely faithful. But like we're saying right now, you see that between film and stage as well. You have to ask, why does this story feel grand, and how do I make it feel grand in my medium? Or why does this work on stage, and why will that not work in this? Like, they could have played with so much with the water and everything. Probably like, do you submerge the camera? Do you go high? Like, what do you do? And again, I haven't seen it for a while, but there's just there's
not a lot of that happening.
Yeah, and when you're given a camera, you can do so much.
Yeah.
You can, like I said, pull it so far away and make Ewan McGregor look like he's so tiny in this big world and he's so lost. Or you can zoom in and make someone feel like the excitement of watching a burlesque or like a can show, but suddenly they're like in the fabric of the skirts.
Yeah.
And they're getting the skirts whipped in their faces as if they're an audience member in the front row. And you can play with that, and you have to find how to do that balance, because on the stage they don't do that. They find other ways to do it.
Which may be the only great thing that they did in that exact kind of example that you're giving, which, again, is quite goofy, but is, Gerard Butler does very dramatically swing his cape around, and sometimes, a couple of points, it uses it to cut the scene, which is, kind of interesting.
I will say, cape swishes on stage are way more fun.
That's true.
Because when you watch someone do a cape swish in person, you're like, woo! But when you see them do it in film, you're like, you got like 10 takes to do that. You got 10 takes to get that perfect.
No, they actually did it all in one take, the entire film.
The entire film? No cuts.
Little known fact.
When he does the cape swish, they actually run to the next place.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Do you have something else?
No, I don't have anything else.
Okay, so I just want to briefly mention a couple of, honorable mentions of the versions that I didn't watch that I do think would be quite interesting. So there's like an 86, I didn't even write this one down. There's like a 1986 version or something, 89, something like that, that seems to lean way more into like the horror aspect. I think it's quite more gory. But it is not considered a good movie at all.
Oh, so, it's also a musical. No, I'm sorry. 1986 musical is the play.
That's the play.
Okay, sorry. Continue.
Anyway, so it's, I don't think it was particularly well received, but it does, I think try to get into like kind of a darker version, Yeah, like even the imagery is much scarier, like, but I think it probably just doesn't work that well.
Yeah.
So that one I decided was not worth going after. There's also a 1962 version, and this one is directed by Terrence Fisher, who is very, very popular for his Hammer horror films.
Hammer horror?
Yeah, so Hammer Horror, it was like, it's a film production company. It was really popular in like the late 60s, 70s. Horror Express, I believe, was one of these.
Oh, that's a good one.
You know, so most of these Hammer films, at least the well-appreciated ones, are starring Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. They are not in this movie.
This mask, I'm looking these up as you're talking about it. The 1962 mask looks like Leatherface.
Let me see.
Look at this.
Oh, that's actually quite scary.
It's really scary.
Yeah. So this is one that I actually thought would be quite interesting had I spent a little more time on this and felt like watching 5 films. There's probably about 5 of them I would have watched. So that one I think I might visit at some point. But there's also, interestingly, a 1998 version, and this was directed by Dario Argento.
Who is that?
He is the one that directed Suspiria
and
Deep Red. And I believe this is also leaning much more into kind of a more sexualized and violent version of this. So I do think this one would be interesting. I also find it particularly interesting because Suspiria, being his most popular and one of my favorite movies, is also kind of blending that like stage production with the like, you know, the pouring yourself into it, you know, almost the same as something like Black Swan or, you know, one of these things where it kind of blends the artistry with the person performing into this kind of like give and take horror. So I think that his version of this might be very interesting. It's not one of his more well-known ones. It kind of just went under the radar in terms of his career, but I think it would be pretty interesting.
Christine Daae is played by his daughter.
Interesting.
The director, Dario Argento. His daughter, Asia Argento, is Christine Daae.
Fascinating. So I would like to give that one a shot, too. I feel like he could do something pretty interesting with it. I don't expect much out of it. I don't imagine it's a very good adaptation of the story, but I feel like, you know, this is another example of us talking about, like, what makes this interesting and what people can kind of toy around with. And so I feel like he would be someone who would, I mean, I'm probably just going to watch it and be like, I'll just watch Suspiria next time. But, you know, it still would be interesting to kind of see it with this property, I think.
And who knows, maybe we'll be back and talk about that a little bit. Or not.
Who knows?
That's a surprise.
But anyway, that's all I have. So, I mean, I don't want to speak for both of us, but I kind of have a feeling that this might be a case where the films are better. They kind of take the idea and run.
Well, I was going to say, we have 3 films to consider. So, it sounds like maybe the 2004 version, there could be some debate there.
It's certainly my least favorite of the 3.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
And I didn't like the movie when I saw it.
Yeah. I do feel like that the varied perspectives just on its own makes it kind of more interesting.
And Raoul has redeeming qualities.
More than redeeming qualities.
But he's white bread.
But yes.
So it's almost like there's also pros and cons.
He's also rich. I mean, he's a Viscount.
He's a Viscount in this too. And then the 1943 version sounds like it's an absolute romp.
I mean, I loved it. I thought it was really, really fun. I thought that, I mean, I would put the 25 version just a step ahead of it, but I think that they really complement each other well. And I really enjoyed both of them, yeah.
So let's say the 1925, 1943 versions are better than the book. And then the 2004 version is kind of up for debate. It depends how much you like musicals.
Yeah, I'm going to say that one's kind of a...
And you know what? I bet the stage production is definitely better than the book.
Yeah, maybe.
So let's give the stage production that, because it'll be grandiose and fun to watch.
I think what bothers me is that Andrew Lloyd Webber really liked the film version.
Oh.
Which makes me question everything.
Well, he destroyed theater.
He did. Stabbed it in the back.
But Alan.
Yes. Hello.
As we come to the end of our episode, it's time.
Yes.
For the quiz.
The quiz.
The tagline quiz.
Oh,
Don't you think I forgot?
Kind of thought you might have.
Oh no.
Okay.
Oh no. So are you ready?
Yes.
I usually go through the rules. I don't remember what the rules are. I don't remember what points you're on. But basically, I'm going to give you the tagline.
It's the game where there's no point, there's no rules, and the points don't matter.
Yeah. Okay, wait, hold on. My mouse. Oh, I'm sorry. My mouse turned on. Okay. Ready?
Yes. Is this you like just remembering this tagline the best you can?
No, I got it figured out.
Okay.
I got it figured out. Apologies, some technical difficulties.
All right.
So, I'm going to give you the tagline. Mm-hmm. I can give you a couple hints.
All right, let's hear it.
The tagline is, does for rock and roll what The Sound of Music did for Hills.
This is Spinal Tap.
This is Spinal Tap.
Yeah, let's go.
1984 mockumentary starring Rob Reiner,
Yes.
Michael McKean, and Christopher Guest.
I have heard that one before.
Spinal Tap, one of England's loudest bands, is chronicled by film director Marty DeBurgi on what proves to be a fateful tour. And if you don't know about Spinal Tap, that's where Turn It Up to 11 came from. And you should absolutely watch it. Well, Alan.
I think I'm getting pretty good at these.
You are getting pretty good at these. I'm going to give you a hard one next time, though, I think.
Boy. Okay. That's fair.
This one I thought would break up our podcast well. So I'm so happy that you have succeeded and that you get another point.
So how many points do I have? Yeah.
Yeah. You have points.
I'm not a very good host at this game.
Well, to be fair, I did design the game for something else, and it's being repurposed for this.
True. Okay.
So that's all for now.
Yes, that is the Phantom of the Opera, and this is Spinal Tap.
And this is In Contrast Podcast.
Oh, right, that one.
Thank you for listening. I'm Nisha.
And I'm Alan.
Let us know what you think and your opinions. You can find us at In Contrast Pod on Instagram and Twitter. Next up, we're talking about No Country for Old Men.
Let's go. Cormac McCarthy.
By Cormac McCarthy. The movie is from what year, Alan?
2007, 6?
I guess we'll find out next time.
That's just off the dome.
All right, we'll find out what year No Country for Old Men was made,
Yes.
the movie.
Everyone will be waited with bated breath.
And we will ask the important question, is the book better than the movie?
See you next time.
Bye.